Let's add him on. Tom, welcome to the program. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you. I hear you fine.
Great. No technical issues. I produce and do everything for FYNation.com myself. And when we are not having technical issues, it's a good day. The only technical issues we have is I woke up with losing my glasses.
Yeah.
So I can barely see.
Okay. You're
So
Thomas?
welcome to the Nosey Liberal, Tom.
Nosey Liberal Tom. Okay. Great. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. And so let's talk about your book. I have a number of questions for you, but you came on to talk about your book, and your book is the hidden history of Big Brother in America: how the death and privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten the U.S. and our democracy. And I I guess which is worse? Is it government interference and spying, or is it corporations, or is it co-equal, or are they intertwined? Which do you see as the bigger enemy in all of this?
Well, it's sort of like saying, would you rather die of a heart attack or cancer?
Mhm.
They're both problematic, and in some ways, and maybe that to torture that analogy, they also interact with each other or can amplify the effects of each other. I in the book I split up the two different. Actually, I add a third one, which is kind of our, the political Big Brother, as it were. But it's basically about government Big Brother on the one hand, which is kind of Patriot Act stuff, generally speaking, and what we see happening around the world, whether it's in China or Singapore or where Russia right now, and then also corporate Big Brother, which usually is hand in glove with corporate Big Brother, as we saw, for example, when Ed Snowden released all that information that was sold to us as being from the NSA. Oh my, holy cow, NSA whistleblower. He didn't work for the NSA. He worked for a private contractor. And, in fact, private contractors can do a lot of things that it's illegal for government to do. And they can hide things after the fact in ways the government can't hide because of the Freedom of Information Act. And so increasingly you find, autocratic governments, or even just, American government, using that shield, that corporate shield, to hide behind.
Well, and goes to my next question. These companies, the Israeli company that was outed and making this app where you can basically touch it and it infects your phone, and then it's a spy device for governments to look into. Is that kind of like what you're talking about, where government seeks out these companies to do their dirty work? They don't make the technology, they just happen to use it, and that makes it equally as evil because this company is then getting rich off of the product that they've made for the government to use.
Well, yeah, that would be one example, and I'm, we need to acknowledge that there are times when it is reasonable and legal, when there's due process involved, for government to actually spy on people. I mean,
Yeah,
there are bad people among us, there are criminals
yeah.
among us, there are war criminals among us. But that said, yeah, it's very much that sort of thing. And another example, I think, Tom, would be the Stingray devices. I didn't even know these things existed until the mid 2000s. I was living in Washington D.C. and my radio studio was down at 14th at K Street, and so I'd walk by the White House on my way home down to the marina every day, and I mean literally right in front of the White House. And starting about the middle of the Obama administration, every time I walked by the White House, my phone would get hot, and I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Why is my phone getting hot when I'm within 2 blocks of the White House? And then it cools down on the other side of that walk, and it's lost 20-30% of its power. And turns out, it came out in the news that there were Stingray devices around the White House. Nobody knew who put them there. Nobody knew why. The assumption was it was probably our own government, but nobody was sure, and or at least in the press. And the way a Stingray works is it's like a little computer, a box, And on one side of it, it connects to a cell tower and acquires the ability to deliver telephone calls and internet data from that cell tower. And on the other side of it, it has an antenna and it pretends to be a cell tower. And your phone is constantly looking for the nearest cell tower so it can get the
Yeah.
best quality signal for you. So as you're walking by a Stingray, your phone links to it thinking it's hooking up to Verizon or T-Mobile or whatever. And in fact, it's talking to a Stingray. And the Stingray then passes your data through to the phone company, whether it's browse your web browser on your phone or the phone call you're making. But it also can record it all or just reroute it to a third party. And so they're very, very effective spy devices. And now we discover that police agencies all over the country are using them. Governments around the world are using them. And there are no really good regulations, at least in the United States, for these devices. I mean, they're way ahead of us in Europe on this regard. But here in the U.S., it's the wild, wild West.
Do you think that, going back to your book, do you think that when we open up knowledge like what you're doing with your book and people are learning about the capabilities, we will get more laws through Congress? Or do you think our Congress is too divided at this point to construct laws to fight this, because it's the dirty little secret that they, both sides, whether Democratic or Republican, want to be able to have this type of information and use it to have keeping themselves in power, whether it be the Obamas or the Donald Trumps of the world. They're happy to have it.
Yeah, there's two dimensions to that. And in a large way, it's a tough question to answer. It's where we're going to go with this. Here's the problem. The big problem isn't just that one party or the other is a fan of spying on people. And it's not that the spy technology is out of control or, has just, gone completely nuts. Whenever we talk about trying to use government to, at least in the United States, to deal with issues like this or other large and consequential issues like climate change and corruption and things, we have to deal with the fact that the United States Supreme Court legalized political bribery. In a small way in 1976 in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, and in 1978 in the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision, authored by Lewis Powell, the Supreme Court said that after 200 years of saying that when politicians were owned by rich people, that was called bribery or corruption, we're no longer going to call it that. We're going to call it First Amendment protected free speech. And then in 2010, they nailed that all together and put a big bow around it and said, by the way, corporations are people and money is speech. And so you've got now, I don't think this is so much true of companies that make Stingray devices, but you've got now big tech companies that are, that basically own politicians left and right. And have the ability to own politicians that they don't already own if they want. If a real fight comes that they're gonna engage with,
Sure.
and as long as as long as America finds itself in that situation where political bribery has been not just decriminalized but elevated by 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, the Citizens United decision. We're going to be bound by those Republican donors, those petro-billionaires and right-wing oligarchs who fund the GOP and who fund so much of our right-wing media. And whether it's 1,500 right-wing talk radio stations across the country, 400 Spanish language now right-wing talk radio stations around the country, right-wing networks like, billionaire Murdoch's Fox News or, et cetera. That as long as we're confronting, these right-wing billionaires who've been completely empowered by 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, we're going to have a challenge dealing with these things. And so it's hard to put it in a partisan frame, by the way. I mean, one of the better books on the dangers of government surveillance and also on Section 230, which I think is worth discussing, Tom, was written by John Pauley, for God's sake. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not an entirely or not an entirely one side issue, Democratic issue. It's particularly ever since big tech decided to take down Donald Trump, with regard to Facebook and his presence on Facebook and Twitter, the right wing has been going, what? What?
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's the thing where I was going to you next, because we have so many, like, FYNation.com is a blip in the spectrum of the bucket when it comes to our little progressive corner. And then thank you so much for that recent video you did for our app. I really appreciate that. Uh, we it took us about 5 years just to get an app, so we don't have any Mercer money. Um, that
too. So I
yeah.
know what you're talking about.
Um, that being said, is do we do ourselves harm when we invite, and you have right wingers on the show, even if we have a topic that we agree with, do we do ourselves harm when we give them another microphone when they have so many already, when they can go to OAN or Newsmax or Fox News? Are we doing a disservice, even if we might be helping, like the information you're trying to uh, put out about Big Brother and Big Tech? Are you or I, in our sense as talk show hosts, helping a right wing narrative along when we really shouldn't be? Where do you come down on that? Because I'm to the point where I used to be a right winger and I changed, and I've called you in your show years ago when I lived in Michigan, but it took me a process to get out of that thinking. Um, should we only have people who are willing to have some kind of a change, or where should we stop the buck with right wingers on our shows and our network and places, our safe spaces, basically, for liberals?
Sure. No, I totally get it, and it's a huge topic, Tom, and one that every time I have a right winger on my show provokes a lot of conversation, shall we say, on social media and in our own
Mhm.
chat room. And from my point of view, I mean, this is just my perspective on this, having done this show for 18, 19 years now. There are only really two reasons that I would have conservatives on the show. And I try to get, when I have conservatives on the show, or reactionaries or whatever you want to call them, it has to fall into these two criteria. One, almost all of us have right wingers in our lives, whether it's
Mhm.
crazy Uncle Ralph at Thanksgiving or the guy who sits next to us at work, or just the person that we encounter standing in line at the grocery store. We all, you can't get away from it. It's half the country,
Yeah.
or a third of the country anyway. Liberals are a third of
Although
the country.
sometimes it seems like half because of the talking points.
Yeah, well, they're very loud. So
Yeah.
my two criteria are: number one, can I model behavior that my listeners will be able to use when confronting people like this, so
Mhm.
that they can get a message across, whether it's heard or not, so they can get a message across and not leave blood on the floor.
Okay.
At Thanksgiving, Uncle Ralph is still Uncle Ralph, and you still love him, even though he's a right wing
All right.
crackpot because he's been watching Fox News. So, number one, I try to model, good debating, good respect of human being behavior in the context of politics. That's not something everybody can do. It's something that I learned to do as a kid because my father was a Republican
Mhm.
and who loved politics and constantly was engaging me in debates. And I was there with him until I was 13 or 14 years old. In fact, when I was in 1964, I was 13. I went door to door with my dad for Barry Goldwater. Within 2 years, I was, I was getting tear gassed in East Lansing, Michigan, in anti-war protests as part of the
Yeah.
SDS. So I have that experience of disagreeing strongly with somebody who I dearly loved. And so, that lifetime of experience has served me well, I think, in doing that. Not everybody can do that, number one. And number two, I think it's really important that all of us hear the right wing talking points and hear a rational rebuttal to them, so that we can use those, even not in interactions with the right wingers, but in the things that we're saying to others, in articles we're writing, in stories we're telling, in anecdotes we're sharing, in bumper stickers we're putting on our cars, whatever it may be. you have to know your enemy, as it were. I mean, it is
Yeah.
Clausewitz's
Yeah.
first rule of war.
No,
And
that you're absolutely right, and in fact, I wanna go point out that I agree with you because most of my show prep when I do show prep for the show, and my audience goes crazy over this, I go to Breitbart and I go to The Blaze first for show
yeah,
prep to talk about what their right-wing drivel will be, and typically, Fox News will have it on their show the following week or during the
yep.
course of that day to do the whataboutism, and we're like, "Well, we already covered that."
Mhm.
So, I totally agree with that point, yeah.
Yeah. So those are the two reasons. I don't do it gratuitously.
Sure.
And I'm down now to having conservatives on 2 or 3 times a month, whereas when we started the program back in 2003, I was having conservatives on 2 or 3 times a week, and because back then, they weren't as nuts as they are now.
No,
Um,
yeah.
and B, the country was actually engaged in serious policy debates about neoliberalism, about Reaganism, and it still was considered respectable to say that we should privatize Social Security and we should end Medicare and we should do away with the social safety net and all that kind of stuff. I think that the ground has shifted substantially in the nearly 20 years since I started that, and I've been dialing back steadily on conservatives on the program to now where I've just got 2 or 3 that I'll invite. Well, I had last week. I had the co-founder of the trucker convoy in Washington D.C.
Yeah,
on,
yeah, yeah,
and I started out saying, the rest of us see what you're doing as pathetic, and
yeah.
it was an interesting conversation. But I increasingly I'm concerned that it's not doing what it used to do. And so we're having conversations about that.
Well, and plus, I go back to the point, they have such a big, huge platform where they can go anywhere, and your platform, like, to promote your book and everything else is it's so small because there aren't a lot of liberal places and progressive places that you can go. I mean, I think I'm the only other morning show other than Stephanie Miller that's out there that's doing a morning show. And I did that by choice, by design, not because I want to attack Stephanie Miller. I think what she does is great, but because I wanted to have a different type of conversation in the morning, other
Yeah.
than just jokes, because I
Choices
think you could,
are good.
you know?
Stephanie does a great job, but choices are good. I mean, we all
Yeah,
we all we all need competition. It helps us fine tune our craft too.
yeah, exactly, and she helps me, and, you do because you present. I called you the professor earlier because I see myself when I listen and watch your show, when I listen on FYNation.com every day at noon, commercial free, by the way. We don't take any money for it, because I just can't. I feel like I'm paying penance for being a Republican. Um, we need to broaden a landscape that is just so diminished. And you putting your book out, especially, how do you like, our tagline is communication with motivation for the network. And I try to motivate my audience to be participatory in social media and kind of attack it the way the right does, but with kindness as opposed to like a gun. What would your suggestion to be to get your message out more? And because you're so kind to be willing to come on my show, and which is new and everything else, how, and you don't have to, how do you what do you tell other progressives and other liberals who are trying to get a sustained message out to get past the noise of OAN and Newsmax and then the social media big tech? What do you say to those people who are trying to do that?
I I'm not a big fan of giving advice, but I can speak for myself.
Mhm.
I'm at a point in my life where I feel like whatever I can do to save the world, essentially, and I mean that literally. I mean, we're looking at climate change that could end all life on Earth. We're looking at nuclear war that could do the same. you know, and then, you know, 1,000 smaller distortions and
Mhm.
destructions, you know, on the way down. That I'm just not willing to goof off anymore. You know, I typically work an 11-hour day, and it's because I have this opportunity to do it. I'm still alive. My heart's still beating. I can still talk. You know, one day soon, that's not going to be the case. And so, and I don't mean my demise is imminent, but I mean, this is the human
Sure,
condition.
sure, no.
And
Then that's gonna be the Breitbart headline, though, ain't it?
right. But you know, the bottom line is that I, we all have this, I believe, this obligation, you know, and to heal the world. You know, tikkun olam, you know, is this deep obligation as part of our humanity. And so, you know, for me, it's my writing and the radio program and TV program that I do. Um, each one of us has to find our own way. I mean, for some people, it's being a good neighbor and friend, or being an extraordinary parent, or even a mediocre parent. But you know, it's
Sure.
parenting. For other people, it's other things. I think we all have to find our own way. But I think increasingly the imperative isn't just to find satisfaction in having done something for its own sake. And I realize that there's a lot of value in that, and I don't want to get into debating Buddhism, but
Sure.
I do think that um, doing things in the context of trying to save and preserve this planet and the human race and all other life on this earth really has to be something that we front load. It has to be front and center. It has to be something that we prioritize.
So, um, back to your book before I let you go, I have one question for you. What would be the biggest takeaway that somebody should get and glean from your book, this new book that you've written, and what you want to leave people with that maybe they put their thinking caps on and look at it in a different light, where that their perspective made, like when I became a democratic socialist, their perspective totally changed. If there's something in your book that maybe even a Republican can be like, "Oh my God, this is the thing." What is there anything in there that you can maybe point out to us in that direction?
Well, you know, one of the things I tried to do with the book is sensitize people to what internet-based warfare could be like, and that's the most extreme end of a spectrum that includes corporate spying on us and government spying on us. But you know, that's you know, where dams can be opened and towns can be drowned and electricity can be shut off to cities and just a whole spectrum of horrible
Sure.
things. Number one, I wanted to flag that for people, and you know, and how that all works. Another is just, you know, the importance of understanding how the internet works, and the particularly the Internet of Things, and so that we can make smarter and wiser decisions with regard to our own personal privacy. And then, you know, I think that there's a larger issue about Section 230 and in the telecommunications law that got changed in 1996. Prior to 1996, if you had put a sign out in front of your house, well, even today by law,
Mhm.
if you put a sign out in front of your house on a Saturday afternoon that says, "Come on in, Saturday night, big party, everybody welcome," and left the front door wide open, and Saturday night about midnight, your house is full of skeezy people doing awful stuff. There's, you know, somebody getting raped in one of the bedrooms. There's somebody shooting heroin in the other bedroom. They're doing a illegal porno movie display in the kitchen,
Yeah.
and the police kick in the door. You would go to jail for hosting that party, for tolerating criminal conduct in your home.
Yep.
And that goes back to British law in the 10th century, literally. I mean, back to the Castle Doctrine. And in 1996, Congress passed a law called the Telecommunications Act of 1996, Section 230, that specifically said there's one exception to that rule. And that is if you build a house on the internet and you invite rapists and child pornographers and drug dealers into that house, and they conduct open crime, even terrorists, and they conduct open crimes, you have no liability whatsoever. Nobody can come after you. You have complete immunity. And immediately after that, Mark Zuckerberg became one of the richest people in the world.
Yep.
And this is something that we need to do something about. I think I might have mentioned earlier, Josh Hawley wrote one of the better books on this. It's who's the right wing crackpot from Missouri who wants to be president.
Yep.
It's not just Democrats who are concerned about this, but we've got to do something about Section 30, and we've got to do something about some of these giant monopolies in the information space.
Thank you, Thom Hartmann. You are definitely the professional, and you are literally our first guest of this year. And I want to thank you again for putting up with my technical failing of losing my glasses. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And thank you for being there for so many liberals and lefties like me who are trying to find common ground, even with Republicans, and doing it on a regular basis. And you're a brilliant author, and everybody should check out your new books and your old books for that matter. So thank you again for coming on the program and spending a little bit more time than you had originally projected. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Tom. It's been an honor and a pleasure to hang out with you. And good luck with the show.
Thank you, Tom. You have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
So that was the amazing Thom Hartmann. That went well. I'm shocked at how well. I've got to take a deep breath. Tom has to take a Tom didn't remember the last time we talked, but I had a different show. But Jim says that was an excellent interview. And Tara Buster says nice.